It's Wednesday, February 25th. I'm talking to Thomas Mulcair, MP for Outremont, Deputy Leader of the Canada's NDP and Finance Committee for the New Democratic Party. We're talking about some of the less well-known aspects of the budget bill. We're calling them hidden horrors. What would you say are the principal hidden horrors of the federal budget bill?
Well, that's a good choice of terms, and it's a tendency that started about a year ago with the Conservatives. Their first attempt was to remove funding for films that they thought went against public order and good morals. So there was going to be a censorship by the Conservative in the film industry, and that was tucked away in a budget bill. They knew that the Liberals were going to vote for the budget bill because it was a confidence matter, so they got away with that. Similarly, they brought in the last time a long list of restrictions on immigration, changing completely the Canadian regime, which used to be based on a right to immigrate if you met all the conditions, and they changed it to a system where it was completely aleatory. Government agents would be allowed to decide, even if you met all the criteria, they would decide whether or not you came into Canada. So they've already set the precedent.
So non-budgetary measures are part of their tradition in budgets?
It's part of the Conservative tradition, and it's a page stolen from the American playbook. You take things that have nothing to do with the budget that's being debated, but if it has to do with your pet project, you stick it in. And that's what this is. This is a litany of right-wing pet projects. So what have they done? They've attacked women's rights. They've attacked unions' rights. They've attacked the environment. And those three are worth looking at in some detail. With regard to women's rights, for 30 years in this country, we've recognized that a woman has a right not only to equal pay for the same job, in other words, a man and a woman doing exactly the same job are of course going to be paid the same thing, but that's been the case since the 1950s. The more difficult thing has always been to assess whether or not the work was of equal value. That's been done in most provinces. Quebec and Ontario are good examples. So what they've done is twofold. They've taken the general rule that existed in Canada of 55% women to determine if it was a women predominant category. They've raised that bar to 70%. There will be very few categories of employment to which that now corresponds. The other thing that they've done, of course, is they've taken the right to go to court and have these things pushed. They've taken that completely away.
Yes, Irene Matheson was telling us about that.
These are charter rights. These are things guaranteed in quasi-constitutional documents in Canada, and they're just taking them away at the stroke of the pen. Now, what's the most galling, of course, is that a party that has the word liberty in its name, the Liberal Party, is actually voting with the Conservatives. It's guilty complicity on the part of the Liberals because it wouldn't get through without the Liberals' support. They've also attacked union rights, rolling back agreements that have already been signed, imposing new restrictions on wages and on collective bargaining. And one of the other things that they've done is attack the essence of an age-old law in Canada. It goes back almost to Confederation, the Navigable Waters Protection Act. It's a regime that has given us, despite the strong problems we've had in southern Canada, generally speaking in Canada, we've done a pretty good job of protecting our waterways, especially if we compare it to Europe. And that Navigable Waters Protection Act, that's been around for 100 years and more, is now being gutted of its essence because the minister, in this case John Baird, who we all know has never been much of a fan of the environment, is going to now have the ability to bring in new rules to exempt whole categories of waterway from the protection of that law. That, coupled with the intention already published of the Conservatives to remove general protections for the environment by taking away the need to have environmental assessments, means that they're using as an excuse the very real economic problems that we're having in this country to drive their right-wing agenda. So they're bringing forward these types of measures, and the most incredible thing with regard to the Liberals is this. In November, when the Liberals brought forward their decision with us to take down the government on these issues, three things had been proposed by the Conservatives. The Conservatives were attacking women's rights, they were attacking union rights, and they were attacking party financing. The Liberals were willing to defeat the Conservatives in November. Fast forward, end of January, the Conservatives bring down a budget that attacks women's rights, attacks union rights, but gives back the party financing that the Liberals rely on more than any other party. Guess what? Now the Liberals are for it, showing quite clearly that the Liberals' priority is the Liberal Party. Have nothing to do with women's rights or other fundamental rights to remove inequality in our society, and they have nothing to do with the guarantees provided by the Supreme Court to collectively bargain and to enforce your bargain.
Going back to the Waterways Act, the Navigable Waterways Act, what is the ideology behind the changes in your estimate?
Well, interestingly enough, the full title is the Navigable Waters Protection Act. And Canada is quite unique because we've got this statute that, as I say, has been around for 100 years. We've also got the act and the treaty governing transboundary waters between Canada and the United States. And that's, again, unique. It's 100 years old, and it actually has references in it to neither party shall allow pollution into the system. So it's quite forward-looking, and it was, for its time, way ahead. What they're doing now is they're removing the general regime that exists under Section 5 of the Navigable Waters Protection Act, and they're introducing the possibility for the minister to develop new categories. So what he'll do, for example, is he'll say things of a certain value are no longer covered, things of a certain size are no longer covered. But that doesn't make any sense. It's not the size or the value, it's the in monetary terms, it's the ecological value of the whole system that has to be maintained and protected. So this is in response to demands that have often been made by municipalities and private owners to have more of a say to what to do. But that's going to be at the detriment of the overall interests of the Canadian population. And they're able to slip that through in this budget bill because the Liberals are giving them their support because they're afraid that if they vote against it, there'll be an election, and they don't think that they're ready for one.
Are there other aspects of this budget bill that Canadians may not be aware of that they would be concerned about if they knew?
Well, one of the things that the Conservatives have been saying is that there's a lot of infrastructure spending being funded through the budget. But in fact, a lot of that is a chimera for the following reason. They're presuming that municipalities and provinces are going to be able to match the funds that they're putting on the table. In fact, most provinces and municipalities don't have those funds. So they're putting up large numbers in different areas and saying we're going to have this type of infrastructure spending, but they're going to bring in rules requiring the provinces and the municipalities to match. And we're quite concerned that the money will never actually flow. According to recent analysis done, only 4% of the money promised the last time by the Conservatives, and it was again supposed to be tens of billions of dollars for infrastructure, only 4% of that money was actually spent.
One last question. Does it concern you when you hear the Prime Minister speaking at the press conference with President Obama when he asserts that Canada is spending 2% of GDP on stimulus and getting to that figure by including presumed contributions from municipalities and provinces? Right.
Canada is in fact contributing closer to 0.7% of GDP, contrary to what the Prime Minister likes to affirm publicly and his Minister of Finance. We've just explained how the provinces and the municipalities are being presumed to contribute, so he's counting that money even though it might not be there. But there's something else that he's counting that's purely fictitious, or at least theoretical. He's counting money that will be saved with government efficiencies, he says he's going to find, and he's going to sell off government assets to the tune of $8 billion. So the real question is, well, where's that money going to come from? And have the Conservatives got any sort of a track record to allow us to assume they'll actually do it? In fact, in the 3 years that the Conservatives have been in power, they've been spending like drunken sailors. They're simply not competent public administrators. They've blown the budget completely. There was a surplus when they arrived. Right now we're heading for a huge deficit, and they've increased government spending. Before the current budget, they had already increased government spending by $40 billion a year, over 22% increase in government spending, with absolutely nothing to show for it. Now we're going to be shoveling a whole new debt onto the shoulders of future generations. The very least we should be doing is helping them build the green, renewable fuel infrastructure of tomorrow, you know, doing things that will actually benefit future generations. We're not doing it. So there's going to be a financial burden left on their shoulders, one, and two, there's going to be nothing to show for it. And that's the tragedy of what the Conservatives are being allowed to do. And I say being allowed to do because it's something that they would not get away with if the official opposition, the Liberals, was not acting instead like the official approval machine of the Conservatives.